While I was away on a business trip, my sister kicked my 12-year-old daughter out of my parents' house. Shocked, I called my mom for an explanation, and she casually said, "You're not needed here anyway." That was the last straw. I stopped paying their bills entirely. Now, they're the ones at risk of ending up on the streets. The heavy weight of a cell phone in my pocket usually signifies a mundane notification, but today, it felt like a lead brick. My mother's voice had been trembling on the line, desperate and urgent, demanding a presence I hadn't offered in years. Standing on this familiar gravel driveway, the air felt thick with the ghosts of a girl I used to be, a girl who was discarded in favor of a sister who could do no wrong. I had just dropped my 9-year-old daughter, Emma, at my friend Sarah's house, promising her I would only be gone for a couple of hours. As I stared at the peeling paint of my parents' front door, I realized that for the first time in nearly 2 decades, I was walking back into the lion's den not out of duty, but out of a haunting curiosity. The last time I had stood in this exact spot with any sense of belonging was the day my life fractured. I was 18, filled with the fire of academic ambition and a prestigious university acceptance letter in my hand. I remember the stinging humidity of that afternoon and the way my mother's eyes refused to meet mine. They told me, with a coldness that still chills my bones, that my college fund was gone. It wasn't lost to a bad investment or a medical emergency. They had simply decided to give every cent of it to my sister, Lisa, so she could have the fairy tale wedding she insisted she deserved. I can still hear my own voice screaming that it was my education, my future, only for my mother to shrug and suggest I take out student loans like everyone else. Lisa needed a proper wedding, they said, as if her white lace and champagne were more vital than my degree. I left that day and never truly looked back. My grandmother was the only soul who stood by me, scraping together what she could to help me through community college. It wasn't the Ivy League dream I had envisioned, but I worked myself to the bone, earned my degree, and built a life out of the wreckage they left behind. The years that followed were a blur of grit and small, hard-won victories. I met Jack, my ex-husband, during my final year of school. We built a home and brought Emma into the world, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I had finally outrun the shadows of my childhood. Even after our divorce 2 years ago, Jack and I remained a united front for our daughter. Now, at 36, I have found a stable rhythm. Between the inheritance from my late grandmother, God bless her soul, and my part-time job at Marshall & Associates, I am comfortable. The apartment I bought with that inheritance provides a steady rental income, allowing me the luxury of time with Emma. Taking a deep breath to steady my racing heart, I finally reached out and rang the doorbell. I whispered a mantra to myself. I am not that scared 18-year-old girl anymore. I am a woman with my own foundation. "Bella, you actually came," my mother said as she pulled the door open. Her enthusiasm was a physical blow, catching me completely off guard. She looked significantly older than I remembered. The gray in her hair had spread like frost, and the lines around her eyes were etched deep by time. My father stood awkwardly behind her, offering a practiced smile that failed to reach his eyes. "Where is Emma?" my mother asked, her eyes darting past me toward the empty driveway. "We haven't seen her since she was a baby." "She is at a friend's house," I snapped, stepping inside and cutting off the false sentimentality. "You said this was urgent. Let's get to it." The house smelled exactly the same, a cloying mixture of my mother's vanilla air freshener and the acidic scent of my father's overbrewed coffee. As they led me into the living room, I couldn't help but notice the decay. The fancy furniture they had bought around the time of Lisa's wedding was now worn and sagging, the fabric thinning at the armrests. The entire house felt like it was holding its breath. "Would you like some tea?" my mother asked, her hands wringing a dish towel with nervous energy. "Just tell me why you called," I said, refusing to sit. "It's been years of silence, and suddenly you need me here." "Why?" My mother didn't answer with words. Instead, she began to cry. These weren't the quiet, manipulative tears I remembered from my youth. These were deep, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from her very marrow. My father placed a heavy arm around her shoulders, his gaze fixed on the floor. "We are going to lose the house," he finally whispered. I stood still, waiting for the rest of the story. Experience had taught me that there was always a hidden layer when it came to my parents. "It's your sister," Mom began, and I felt that familiar, bitter twist in my gut. Of course, it was about Lisa. She asked us to take out a business loan for her husband, Tom. We used this house as collateral to get him started. Let me guess, I said, my voice flat and devoid of sympathy. Tom's business went bankrupt, and Lisa isn't paying the debt. My father finally looked up, though he still couldn't maintain eye contact. The business failed, yes. Lisa and the kids are struggling just to get by. They've stopped making the payments on the loan, and we simply can't cover it ourselves. The bank is coming for the house, Bella. A dry, hollow laugh escaped my throat, and they both stared at me as if I had lost my mind. Maybe I had. The irony was almost too much to bear. So, you called me? I asked. The daughter you abandoned? The one whose future you traded away to buy Lisa a party? You want me to bail you out of yet another mess that she created? We know you're doing well, my mother said quickly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. We heard about your apartment and the rental income. We wouldn't ask if we weren't truly desperate, Bella. Please. I stood there in the center of the room, looking at these two people who had chosen my sister over me at every crossroad. They hadn't even sent me an invitation to their events over the years. They had barely acknowledged me at my grandmother's funeral because Lisa was pregnant and needed all the attention. The resentment was a physical weight, yet something in the desperation of their faces gave me pause. I'll think about it, I heard myself say. The words surprised me as much as they did them. I need to go pick up Emma. As I drove away from that house, the engine's hum couldn't drown out the conflict in my mind. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure if jumping would be the biggest mistake of my life or the most important decision I'd ever make. Regardless, I knew that the stale status quo of our estrangement had ended. Mom, why are you crying? Emma asked the moment she climbed into the car at Sarah's. My daughter has always been too perceptive for her own good. I quickly wiped my cheeks, not even realizing I had let tears fall during the drive. I'm just thinking about something, sweetie, I said, trying to force a casual tone. Actually, I saw your grandparents today. Emma's eyes lit up with a pure, uncomplicated joy. Really? The ones from the old pictures? Can I finally meet them? Her question hit me like a physical blow. Of course she wanted to meet them. They were her blood, her grandparents, even if they had never bothered to be a part of her life. I spent the following week in a state of mental warfare, barely sleeping as I played out every possible scenario. You are absolutely insane, Sarah told me over coffee a few days later. After everything they put you through, you're actually considering this? Maybe I am, I admitted, staring into my mug. But Emma deserves a chance to know her family. And honestly, maybe I need this too. Maybe I need to face it all instead of just running. A week later, I found myself back in that driveway. This time, Emma was bouncing excitedly in the passenger seat. The reunion was a spectacle of awkwardness and raw emotion. My mother burst into tears the moment she saw the girl, and my father stood there like a statue until Emma broke the ice by running up and throwing her arms around them both. For a fleeting second, I saw genuine joy in their eyes, the kind of look they used to reserve only for Lisa. We spent the afternoon in that drafty living room. I watched from the sidelines as Emma completely charmed them. She showed them her drawings, chatted about her school projects, and beamed while telling them about the time she won the spelling bee. They hung on her every word, and for the first time, I saw something unexpected in their expressions when they looked at me, regret. That evening, as Emma chatted happily about her new grandparents during the drive home, I made my choice. It was a gamble, perhaps a foolish one, but I was going to help them. The next day, I called my real estate agent to arrange a new lease for my own apartment, and then I called my mother. I'll help with the loan payments, I told her before I could lose my nerve. But Emma and I are moving in. The rental income from my apartment will go directly toward the debt, and I'll help with the household bills, but we are going to set some very clear boundaries. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of my mother breaking down again. Thank you, Bella. Thank you so much. Within 2 weeks, Emma and I had moved our lives into the old house. I immediately set to work making the place functional again. I bought new appliances, a high-end refrigerator with an ice maker that Emma thought was magic, a dishwasher that actually cleaned, and a washing machine that didn't sound like a jet engine taking off. My father's chronic back problems even seemed to improve once he was relieved of the physical strain of hand-washing everything. Life fell into a surprisingly comfortable routine. My mother began making breakfast for everyone, and despite my initial defenses, I had to admit it was nice to wake up to the smell of fresh coffee and pancakes. She took over picking Emma up from school and helped her with her homework. She even started teaching Emma how to bake, a task I never had the patience for. My father transitioned to part-time work, his body finally getting a rest. He started teaching Emma how to play chess, a game I had never learned, and their weekly matches quickly became a household tradition. With the domestic burden lifted, I found myself able to focus more at the office. One afternoon, my boss, Mrs. Thompson, called me into her office. "We've noticed your increased dedication lately, Bella. How would you feel about a promotion?" The new position came with a significant raise, but it also required regular business trips to other states. In the past, I would have declined without a second thought. As a single mom with no support system, it was impossible. But now, things were different. "I'll take it," I said, surprised by the confidence in my own voice. The first time I had to leave for a 3-day trip to Chicago, I was a nervous wreck. I must have told myself she'll be fine 100 times an hour. And she was. Throughout the trip, my mother sent me photos of Emma doing her homework, eating dinner with my father, and laughing. It was working. The bridge I thought was burnt to ash was holding weight. Yet, even in the quiet moments of success, there were flickers of the old unease. I would catch my mother taking hushed phone calls from Lisa, disappearing into the other room the moment I walked in, reminding me that while I was the one saving the house, I might still be the outsider. I found bank transfer notifications on my mother's phone while I was helping her set up her new tablet, and the sight of them made my stomach drop. Every month, money was being funneled directly into Lisa's account. When I confronted her, my mother instantly became defensive, claiming that Lisa simply needed help because she was going through a rough patch with Tom. I reminded her that I was the one paying every single household bill and covering the loan that Lisa had defaulted on, but my mother snapped back. She told me I didn't understand, insisting that Lisa wasn't to blame for Tom's business failing and that she had 2 children to feed. I shot back that I had a child of my own to provide for, along with all of theirs, but she turned away and shut down the conversation the same way she always did when it came to her favorite daughter. These arguments became a frequent background noise in our lives, but I tried my best to ignore them for Emma's sake. My daughter seemed happy. My career was finally advancing, and on the surface, it felt like we were slowly healing 18 years of wounds. One night, after a few glasses of wine, my father even offered a rare apology for the college fund. He admitted they had made big mistakes, and for a moment, I wanted to open up and have the conversation we had been avoiding for nearly 2 decades. But my mother was quick to change the subject to Emma's school play, burying the past once again. 3 years passed in this fragile state of peace. Emma turned 12, growing more into a young woman every day, and I became accustomed to my demanding role at work. The loan payments were steady, the bills were paid, and life felt stable until one Tuesday evening. I had just closed a major deal in Phoenix and caught an earlier flight home, hoping to surprise Emma. As I pulled into the driveway, I heard a cacophony of voices coming from inside the house. When I opened the front door, I stepped into absolute chaos. Sprawled across the couch I had just reupholstered the month before was Lisa. Beside her were 2 children I only recognized from social media, my niece, Anna, and my nephew, Michael. Suitcases were strewn across the living room like a disaster zone. Lisa was tapping away on her phone, barely looking up as I stood there in my work clothes. She looked at me with a tone that made it clear I was the intruder in my own home, lazily announcing that she had left Tom because he was a loser and that she and the kids would be staying here now. I stood there, still holding my work bag, trying to process the sight of my parents sitting in their usual chairs, refusing to look me in the eye. My niece and nephew were sprawled on the floor, engrossed in their tablets. I repeated her words slowly, asking if she truly intended to stay in the house where I paid every bill and covered the loan she abandoned. Lisa's face flushed a deep red as she mocked me, calling me Miss Perfect and claiming that some people had actual problems. I felt my blood pressure rising as I pointed out that taking out a loan in our parents' name and not paying it was a pretty significant problem. My mother finally found her voice, but only to tell us to stick together as a family. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh, wondering where this family spirit was when they gave away my future or when they excluded me from Lisa's wedding. My mother snapped at me to let it go because my sister needed them now. The weeks that followed were a nightmare of tension. Lisa spent her days on the couch while her children ran wild, creating messes they never bothered to clean. But the most painful part was watching my parents. Suddenly, Emma became invisible to them. When she tried to show my mother an A on a math test, she was brushed aside so my mother could help Michael with a video game. When she asked my father for their weekly chess match, he claimed he was too tired, only to spend the next 2 hours playing catch with Anna in the backyard. I confronted my mother about the blatant favoritism, but she dismissed me, saying Emma was older and didn't need the attention that the younger kids required. I threw myself into my work, taking on extra projects just to avoid the toxic atmosphere at home. Lisa still hadn't looked for a job, and my parents defended her at every turn, claiming she was going through a difficult time. I was still the one paying for the groceries that vanished twice as fast, but seeing Emma become a ghost in her own home hurt more than the financial drain ever could. The breaking point came on a Wednesday when I arrived home early to take Emma out for ice cream, our little escape from the house. Before I even opened the door, I heard Lisa's voice echoing through the hallway, calling my daughter a lazy, good-for-nothing brat. I rushed inside to find Lisa looming over Emma, who was on her knees picking up Michael's scattered toys. I demanded to know what was happening, and Lisa spat that my precious princess was refusing to help and thought she was too good to clean up after her cousins. I exploded, pointing out that I was the only one working while she lay around expecting everyone else to support her. Lisa ran to our parents crying, and of course, they took her side, pleading with me to be more understanding of Lisa's children. They had no answer when I asked what about my child. The following week, I had to fly to Seattle for an emergency meeting. I asked Emma 100 times if she would be okay for 5 days, and she assured me she would be fine as long as we video chatted every night. For days into the trip, my phone rang at 9 p.m. Emma's voice was small and broken by sobs as she told me she was outside on the street. Aunt Lisa had kicked her out, claiming she was in the way. My heart stopped. My 12-year-old daughter was alone in the dark on the street. I called my friend Sarah to pick her up immediately, then I called Lisa, who sneered that maybe now the princess would learn her place. When I called my parents, my mother's voice was cold. She suggested that maybe it was better this way and that Emma and I should find somewhere else to live because we didn't fit there anymore. Everything became crystal clear in that moment. Some people never change. I told her she was right, we never fit, and I booked the first flight home to end this cycle forever. The flight was the longest 5 hours of my life. When I finally reached Sarah's house at 3 a.m., I found Emma asleep on the couch with tear tracks on her cheeks. Sarah whispered that it was worse than I knew. Lisa had been treating Emma like a servant for weeks, forcing her to clean and do laundry for the other children. When Emma finally stood up for herself, Lisa had physically pushed her out the door while my parents watched and did nothing. I spent the rest of the night calling my rental agency to reclaim my apartment and contacting a lawyer regarding all the furniture and appliances I had purchased. The next morning, I took Emma to breakfast. I asked her if Lisa had hurt her before, and her silence was a deafening confirmation. She whispered that Lisa and my mother both told her she was spoiled and needed to learn her place. I gripped my coffee cup until my hands shook, asking why she hadn't told me. She looked at me with those wise, 12-year-old eyes and said it was because I seemed happy and was finally smiling more. I took her hand and promised her that nothing was more important to me than her, not my parents, and certainly not that house. We drove to the house while Lisa was out. My mother looked surprised to see me, but I walked past her without a word. I had hired a moving crew and they were already waiting. I instructed them to take everything I had bought, the refrigerator, the washing machine, the dishwasher, the couch, and the TV. As my mother's voice rose in a panic, I calmly showed the movers my receipts. My father arrived home just as they were dismantling the entertainment system, standing in the doorway in total shock. I bought that television and the sound system last Christmas. My father started to protest, but I cut him off before he could find his footing. I told him to just stop, that there was nothing left to discuss after he stood by and watched Lisa throw his own granddaughter onto the street in the middle of the night. They had chosen Lisa over me for nearly 20 years, and now they had made the same choice against Emma. As the movers hauled out the heavy appliances, my mother's voice quivered with panic as she asked about the loan and the mounting bills. I turned to face them both one last time, my heart like flint, and told them they would have to figure it out for themselves. I reminded them that I had to figure out college on my own, just as Emma had to figure out how to survive on a dark sidewalk. Alone. I told them to consider the removal of these things as my final payment for every time they had pushed me aside. The following months were a barrage of noise and desperation as my parents and Lisa refused to let go without a fight. My phone became a graveyard of angry accusations and tearful pleas, alternating between my mother's guilt trips and my father's demands. They sent screenshots of overdue utility notices and photos of Lisa's children looking sad, hoping to manufacture enough guilt to bring me back under their thumb. My mother even sent pictures of my old bedroom, a pathetic attempt to weaponize nostalgia against me. One evening, Emma and I sat on our apartment balcony sharing a pizza. Our home felt different now, physically smaller than the drafty house we left, yet somehow much more spacious without the suffocating weight of their expectations. Emma asked why I didn't answer them, and I told her that we didn't owe them anything and that sometimes the best response is silence. She admitted she missed the chess games with her grandfather, but she didn't miss the way she was made to feel when Lisa was around. I pulled her close and promised her that we would get her professional chess lessons from someone who wouldn't abandon the board just because a cousin walked into the room. Through the family grapevine, I heard the inevitable updates. My parents had been forced back into full-time work, struggling under the weight of a house they couldn't afford and a loan they couldn't pay. The bank was threatening foreclosure, and Lisa was still doing what she did best, complaining about my perceived selfishness to anyone who would listen while refusing to get a job. I took the money I had been wasting on their survival and spent it on Emma instead. We took weekend trips to theme parks, went hiking, and took cooking classes together. Without the constant drain of their drama, I thrived at work and finally enjoyed quality time with my daughter. Almost a year after we walked away, Emma asked me if I was finally happy. I stopped what I was doing and realized that for the first time in my life, I truly was. I had protected my daughter, broken a toxic cycle, and stopped putting myself last. I deleted their numbers that afternoon, keeping only their voicemails in a folder labeled Never Again as a permanent reminder of why we could never go back. I eventually heard the bank foreclosed on the house, my parents moved to a tiny apartment, and Lisa moved on to a new boyfriend to support her. I don't care if they still think I'm the selfish one. Emma and I are a real family now, and the money that used to pay for Lisa's mistakes is now sitting safely in Emma's college fund. This time, nobody is going to give it away for a wedding.